3 days before my wedding, the man I loved for 6 years sat across from me at our kitchen table. The same table where we used to eat cereal at midnight and argue about what to watch on Netflix. And he told me I didn't fit into his future anymore. He didn't yell, he didn't even look away. He just said it, calm and quiet, like he'd been rehearsing it for weeks. And maybe he had. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember the way the morning light came through the window and hit the coffee mug he'd bought me for my birthday. The one that said world's okayest teacher because he thought it was funny. I remember thinking, this is the last normal moment of my life. And I was right. My name is Claire. I'm a middle school art teacher from a small town in Ohio. I grew up in a house where the heat sometimes went out in January and my mom stretched a pot of soup for 4 days. We weren't poor in spirit, not even close, but we were practical people. Grounded people. The kind of family that shows up, works hard, and doesn't ask for much. I was never the girl who dreamed about a big wedding or a fancy house. I just wanted something real, something steady, someone who meant it. I met Ryan Calloway when I was 22. We were both in our last year of college, me studying education, him pre-law. He was charming in a way that felt earned, not performed. He made me laugh. He remembered things I said weeks after I said them. On our 3rd date, he brought me a book I'd mentioned once in passing, and I thought, this is a man who listens. We were together for 6 years. I watched him take the LSAT twice. I worked double shifts at the campus coffee shop so we could afford a nicer apartment while he studied. I made flashcards with him at 2 a.m. and celebrated when he finally passed the bar like it was my own victory, because it felt like it was. We were a team. That's what I believed. He proposed in my mom's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. Simple ring, nothing fancy. He got down on one knee on her linoleum floor while she pretended not to watch from the hallway. I said yes before he finished the sentence. That was the happiest day of my life. I was so sure. When Ryan got the job offer from a big firm in Chicago, we celebrated with a bottle of wine we couldn't really afford and talked all night about our future. We were excited. I was excited. We packed up our little apartment, drove 6 hours with everything we owned in a rented truck, and started over. Together. But Chicago changed things. Not all at once, that's not how it happens. It happens slowly, in small moments you almost don't notice. The first time he seemed embarrassed by me was at a firm dinner 3 months after we moved. I wore a nice dress. I thought I looked fine. But when someone at the table asked what I did and I said I taught middle school art, there was this pause, this half-second of silence, and Ryan jumped in and changed the subject. I told myself he was just nervous, that it was a stressful environment, that it meant nothing. He started coming home later. He started talking differently, using words like optics and brand alignment in regular conversation. He bought new suits and started working out and stopped watching the shows we used to watch together. I would wait up for him sometimes, and by the time he came home, I was already asleep, and in the morning, he was already gone. I noticed when Vanessa Hartwell's name started coming up. She was the daughter of one of the senior partners at the firm. Harvard Law, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who has never once had to think about where her next paycheck was coming from. Ryan mentioned her casually at first, just a colleague, just someone from work. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I trusted him. I told myself that 6 years meant something. I was right that 6 years meant something. I was wrong about what it meant to him. The morning he told me, I was standing at the kitchen counter making toast. He sat down at the table and said he needed to talk to me. I turned around and looked at his face, and I knew, the way you know things in your body before your brain catches up, I knew. He said Vanessa made him feel like the man he was supposed to be. He said I was wonderful, that I had always been wonderful, but that the life he wanted, the life he was building, I didn't fit into it. He said he was sorry. I stood there holding a piece of toast and I didn't say anything for a long time. And then I asked him one question. I said, "Did you ever love me? Or did you just love the version of yourself you got to be when I believed in you? He didn't answer. He looked at the table. I took the ring off. I set it down next to his coffee cup. I got my coat and my keys and I walked out. I drove for a while without knowing where I was going. And somewhere on the highway outside the city, I started crying. Not gentle crying, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and terrible, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. I had to pull over at a gas station. I sat in that parking lot in my good coat for almost an hour and I just fell apart. Completely. Every piece of me at once. I called my mom. She answered on the second ring the way she always did. I couldn't even get the words out properly, but she understood anyway. She said, "Come home. Just come home," so I did. I moved back into my old bedroom at my mom's house in Ohio. I slept in my childhood bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things I should have seen. I made all the calls, the caterer, the florist, the venue, the bridesmaids. I explained it over and over again until the explaining felt like its own kind of injury. I returned gifts. I accepted casseroles from neighbors who had heard through the small-town grapevine and didn't know what else to do. A mutual friend told me, probably without thinking, that Ryan and Vanessa were already posting photos together. That they looked happy. I looked at the pictures once. Just once. They looked like an advertisement for something. Perfect and glossy and completely hollow, at least to me. I stopped painting. That was how I knew how bad it really was. I have painted my whole life, since I was 7 years old, and for 4 months after Ryan left, I couldn't pick up a brush. I had nothing to put on the canvas. Or maybe I had too much, and none of it felt safe to look at. My mom didn't push me. She just fed me and watched bad television with me and let me be quiet when I needed to be quiet. But one evening, about 5 months in, she came into my room and put a paintbrush down on the bed next to me without a word. Just left it there and walked out. I picked it up. I don't know how long I painted that night. I lost track of time completely. I painted everything: the kitchen table, the ring, the gas station, the highway, the way the morning light looked the last normal day of my life. I painted the feeling of being loved imperfectly for 6 years and losing it in 5 minutes. It was not a pretty painting. It was honest. When I finally came up for air, I felt something shift. Not better, not yet, but different. Like something had moved through me and out the other side. I went back to Chicago 6 months after I left. New apartment, different neighborhood. I went back to teaching my kids, my classroom, my purpose. I started painting again in the evenings, slowly at first, then obsessively. I put some of my work online because my friend Josie told me to, and I had nothing to lose. People responded to it in a way I didn't expect. Strangers were writing to me about how my paintings made them feel seen. Followed, then more followed, then a lot more. A small gallery in River North reached out. They wanted to show my work. I almost said no. I almost talked myself out of it because I still had that voice in the back of my head, Ryan's voice, or the voice he'd given me, that said I was not the kind of woman who got to have things like that. That I was a casserole kind of woman in a champagne kind of world. But Josie made me say yes. Josie dragged me to my own opening night in a cab and handed me a glass of wine and said, "You made all of this, so stop apologizing for it." The gallery was small. String lights, exposed brick, maybe 40 people. I was nervous the entire time, hovering near the back, pretending to look at my own paintings like I hadn't stared at them for months. That's when James Whitmore walked in. I didn't know who he was. I want to be very clear about that. I had no idea. He was tall, quietly put together, not flashy. He came with a business associate who had dragged him there the same way Josie had dragged me. He didn't look like he was performing anything. He just looked like a man who was actually present in the room, which, I was starting to understand, was rarer than it should be. He stopped in front of the painting I had made that night in my childhood bedroom. The one I had poured everything into. He stood there for a long time, long enough that I noticed. And I walked over, not knowing what else to do, and said, "That one's not for sale." He turned and looked at me and said, "Why not?" I said because it's not finished yet. He smiled. Not a charming smile, an honest one. He said, I don't think that's the real reason. He was right, but I didn't tell him that. He asked me to coffee the next morning. I said I'd think about it. Josie said I would absolutely be there and gave him my number before I could stop her. I went. I told myself it was just coffee. It didn't mean anything. I was not doing this again. And then we talked for 4 hours and I forgot to be afraid. He asked me about my students. He asked me what it felt like to watch a kid discover something they were good at. He asked me about the painting, not what it meant, but what it felt like to make it. He asked about my mom, about Ohio, about what I missed about my small town and what I didn't. He asked questions like he had all the time in the world and nowhere else to be. He didn't talk about money. Not once. I found out later from Josie, who found out from the internet, that James Whitmore was the founder of one of the most successful private equity firms in the country, that his family had been wealthy for 3 generations, that he was the kind of man whose name appeared in financial magazines. I sat with that information for a few days and felt genuinely confused because nothing about him had felt like any of that. He kept showing up. That's the thing I want you to understand about James. He was patient in a way that felt deliberate. He never rushed. He called when he said he would. He showed up to my classroom art show with 20 of my 7th graders' parents because I had mentioned it was the same night as a board meeting, and he had rearranged the board meeting. He brought me books I'd mentioned once in passing. And something in my chest, that thing that had locked itself up tight the morning I set that ring on the kitchen table. It started, very slowly, to open. We had been together about 7 months when he took me to a charity gala, my first real event in his world. I wore a blue dress. I was terrified. He looked at me right before we walked in and said, "You are the most interesting person in any room you walk into. Everyone else just needs a minute to catch up." We walked in, and across the ballroom I saw Ryan. He was there with Vanessa. She was in a black gown, diamonds at her throat, everything she was supposed to be. Ryan was in a tux, looking exactly like the man he had always wanted to become. And I felt almost nothing, just a quiet kind of clarity, like looking at a photograph of somewhere you used to live. Ryan saw me. I watched his expression change. I don't know exactly what he saw when he looked at me. I only know what I felt, which was grounded, which was whole, which was present. James put his hand on my back and said something that made me laugh, and I laughed genuinely, and I watched Ryan watch that. He found a moment later in the evening to approach me alone. He said he was glad to see me, that he hoped I was well, that he thought about that day sometimes. I looked at him and I felt compassion, real compassion, not performance, and I told him I was more than okay. I told him I was grateful. I told him that I meant it. Because here is the truth I had spent a year learning. Ryan leaving me was the cruelest kindness I ever received. Not because James has money. Not because the universe handed me some reward for suffering. But because being left cracked me open and forced me to find out what was inside. And what was inside was worth finding. Ryan didn't leave me for a richer woman. He left me because he didn't know how to value something that didn't come with a price tag. That is his limitation. It was never mine. James chose me on the opening night of a small gallery show with string lights and plastic cups of wine. When I told him something wasn't for sale, and he smiled like that was exactly the right answer. He chose me when I was a middle school art teacher from Ohio with a broken heart and paint on her hands, and absolutely nothing to offer except exactly who I was. And he kept choosing me, every day, not because I fit into some image of the life he was supposed to have, but because I was exactly the life he actually wanted. The painting, the one he stopped in front of that first night, I hung it in our home. It is finished now. I know that because when I look at it, I don't feel the pain anymore. I feel the distance I've traveled. I feel the woman I became in the space between losing everything and finding something true. If you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like you were left because you weren't enough, I need you to hear this. You were not left because you were too simple or too plain or too ordinary. You were left because the person who left you could not see you. And that is a failure of vision, not of worth. The right person will not need you to be more. They will need you to be exactly, completely, unapologetically yourself. And when they find you, not the curated version, not the version that fits someone else's future, they will not let go. I know because someone stood in front of my most broken painting and refused to let me sell it short. And then he came back for the painter.